education and literacy in Mississippi, and it has truly been a journey. My colleague, Dr. Tanette Smith, is out on medical leave. She hates that she's not here, and it's so beautiful with all the trees and all the colors and stuff. But I will do my best to do this presentation justice. All right, so at the Mississippi Department of Education, we usually begin our presentations with our vision and our mission, creating a world-class educational system, and also for our mission to provide the leadership in order to do that for our students to compete in the global economy. For our State Board of Education goals, we have 6 goals. They center around early childhood education, but I'll start by saying that Mississippi is probably the only southern state that doesn't have a full statewide funded pre-K. Our students, the compulsory school attendance age is actually 6, which means students can show up at 1st grade. All right, although we do have statewide kindergarten, we haven't quite caught up with the legislation to make kindergarten mandatory. However, if students begin in kindergarten, once they show up, and they have to abide by the compulsory attendance laws. So we start with early childhood education, and we really work our way through the system as it relates to teachers and leaders, professional development, accountability, and of course, making sure the students are ready for college and career. So we're going to look a little bit today at our preparation and planning for our 3rd grade reading policy, our literacy coaching model. How many of you have been literacy coaches? Yes, those y'all my people. All right, so implementing a statewide professional development program, and then analyzing the results of that program through a recently released study that I had the pleasure of working with Florida Center for Reading Research and Rail Southeast in order to produce. So we're going to talk about the steps. Step 1, adopting K-3 reading policies. How many of you are from states that have K-3 or 3rd grade reading policies where if a student does not pass an assessment, he or she is not promoted to 3rd grade? All right, a few of you. So I'll talk to you about our journey and all of the different things that we've put into place. And you'll hear me say throughout this presentation that there's enough accountability for everyone. All right, so we adopted this legislation in K-3 reading, and we do have a governor who is, he's really made education, among other things, his platform, Governor Phil Bryant in Mississippi. And I learned when I was selected for this position in 2013 that Governor Bryant himself is dyslexic. And he talked about how when he was in 3rd grade, he was retained, and that following year is when they were able to identify the dyslexia and his reading deficiency. And he said that that was the one of the best years of his life, because he was now able to get the help that he needed, and no one knew what it was before. They were just saying, okay, well, he's just not ready. And when he got retained, he really, a teacher cared enough to drill deeper and to identify that. So he's made some of these things, especially as it relates to education, his priority. We adopted the Early Learning Collaborative Act. Now, our state gives a whopping $4 million a year to 14 early childhood collaboratives. So that's our state's only investment in early childhood education. But I'll say this, something is better than nothing, right? Our state superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, is from the East Coast. She's from the DC, Maryland area, and her platform, she's going to be, I believe she's the incoming president for CCSSO, and her platform is going to be early childhood education. So we have an Early Learning Collaborative Act where we grant funds to partnerships, to districts that decide to partner with Head Start or their local child care centers, and they ensure that there's an alignment of professional development and opportunities to observe classrooms and go in, and they're collaborating. And I'll show you a little bit later about how much growth we've had with our early learners as it relates to those who are in this early learning collaborative. We also now require a kindergarten readiness assessment. There's a pre-test and a post-test, and the assessment is the Start Early Literacy through Renaissance Learning. So students are assessed when they enter kindergarten, they're assessed when they leave kindergarten to show how much growth they've made. And we always say, kiss a kindergarten teacher, because they get students, they get children who come from all different types of backgrounds. Just because they've been in the daycare does not mean that they were taught how to read, or that they have any type of foundational skills or anything when they leave there. Some of them are babysitting services. Some of them are high quality. Some students come from home or Nana's house, or the person in the neighborhood that's keeping kids. I mean, so they come from a variety of places. With the kindergarten readiness, our first data, the first time that we collected this data in 2015, and every year since, it's shown that 2/3 of our kindergarten students have come in not ready, not meeting the benchmark. And at the end of the year, 2/3 leave ready. So that's why I say, kiss a kindergarten teacher. All right, and so we have it beginning at kindergarten, and then we have our 3rd grade law. So now what happens with our 1st and 2nd grade teachers? There's enough accountability for everybody, right? So now they have to really step their game up, because our kindergarten teachers are now sending students to you more ready than they've ever been before. So what are you going to do in 1st and 2nd grade to ensure that the learning continues and that our students are successful on our 3rd grade gate, is what the community calls it. So the Literacy-Based Promotion Act was also passed in 2013, and it seeks to eliminate social promotion. It says that students must be ready by 3rd grade according to the state accountability assessment. And if they're not, then they may qualify for good cause exemptions. We'll get into that in a little bit. But intensive interventions, all of those things that you think should just be a part of teaching, right, are now, there's a laser light focus on what are you really doing, not just for the children who have IEP or 504, but what are you doing for all children, okay? So we have all of these policies in place. Step 1. So with the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, first step was parental notification. How many of you who are parents, maybe, because I'm sure you're not doing this as a teacher because you're in this room, at the end of the year, you go to the beginning of the year, you meet the teacher, you have a great parent night, you may go for parent-teacher conferences, then all of a sudden at the end of the year you find out that the child isn't passing. And you say, how did that happen? Right? So with this law, parental notification is mandatory. Within the first 6 weeks of school, all students K through 3 must take a screener. The screener is also through Renaissance Learning. All right, so STAR Early Literacy and STAR Reading for our 1st through 3rd grade. They must take a screener. If the screener shows that there's a reading deficiency, parents must be notified in writing that there's a reading deficiency. The school must tell what they're going to do in order to remedy that, or how they're going to address those deficiencies, and give parents suggestions on what they can do at home. And this notification and this communication must be provided with each quarterly progress report. So the first step is, we don't want parents at the end of 3rd grade saying what? I never knew, no one ever told me, right? So this was a very important piece that required a lot of PR. Because when you pass a law like this, and I'll talk about community response as well, you have to be ready to answer questions from all stakeholders as to why we're doing this. And the running joke for me was, when we passed the law, you have people saying, but we're not ready. And I'm like, well, what have you been doing for the past? Like that's the business of school, right, to teach. But anyway, all right, so, but beginning in 2018, 2019, what we're requiring is going to change. We're going to ask that instead of students scoring above the lowest reading level, which is what our law initially said, now they have to score above the lowest 2 reading levels. So if you think about a 5-level system, which is what we have, now in order to pass the assessment, students must score level 2 or above on the state assessment. 18-19 next year, they will have to score a level 3 or above. So we're slowly trying to increase our expectations for our students. All right, so identifying reading deficiencies. Another piece of this was to get a common screener. In our state, never before had we had a common screener. When we first began this initiative, we surveyed districts, and there are probably about 144 school districts in Mississippi. A lot. We surveyed districts, and there may have been about 18 or 19 different screeners being used. So people could just use whatever they wanted, and whether it was a computerized test or just a teacher-student assessment screener, they were using whatever they wanted. With this law, we decided to look at a common screener, and we told schools and districts that you all can use whatever you want as far as progress monitoring, but we needed to have that beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year data from a common screener. So that was also a big shift because people like what they like, right? They like their reps, they like the programs they have, they like what they like. So it was really a shift to get them all to say, okay, now we're going to use this screener. So intensive reading instruction and intervention must be documented for each student. I think later on the panel, one of my questions is going to be about what teachers need to know. Assessments, but not just formative and summative, which is what we're always talked about. Diagnostic assessments, what do you do with it? A lot of times we say, oh, diagnostic assessment, check, right? But what do you really do with that data? How do you group your students according to what those reading deficiencies are? How do you address them? And are you the person to address them? Maybe there's an interventionist that you're lucky enough to have, that your funds allow you, fund, but maybe not. Maybe you're the teacher who has to do it all. So now students must have an individual reading plan once that deficiency is identified. And we were asked to provide some guidance on that. We love our legislature, right? Says everyone, right? So they write these policies, and then they say to the Department of Education, well, you just kind of tell people what we mean by that, right? So they said, okay, we're going to have an individual reading plan. And in this plan, you have to have the student's specific diagnosed reading skill, goals and benchmarks for growth, progress monitoring, and all of you are saying, okay, that's just good teaching, right? Sometimes for students who may have an IEP or 504, or sometimes where it's mandated, but for any child where a reading deficiency is identified, you may not see that occurring often, where someone is really looking at this student and saying, I'm going to address your needs whether you have a documented IEP or not. Some of these other things kind of got people thinking. The type of additional instruction services and interventions the student will receive. So we told teachers and principals, don't put something down that you can't provide. Don't say that this child needs tutoring, but you're not offering free tutoring at your school. Because then what would parents say? Well, now I need to go and find a tutor for my kid, right? So be realistic in the additional instructional services, what you have at your school and what you can provide to students for free, all right? And of course, the types of intervention students will receive. And there's also this big thing where people confuse intervention with remediation. We need to talk about that, right? Intervention and remediation are two completely different things. All right, so then, in our state, we have a lot of local control. So they can choose, although we have this list of textbook adoption list is what it's called. Our districts can choose from the list or not, right? So within this IRP, though, they have to indicate the research-based reading instructional program that the teacher uses. Then that begins to raise questions about whether the components of the program or curriculum address the components of reading. Dr. Truckenmiller talked about that. The different types of resources that we buy, and then once you unwrap the shrink wrap, and then there are still some pieces that still have shrink wrap on it. You get the teacher's edition and student edition, right? And you're just like, we're good to go. All right, but so do you know within that program whether it actually fully addresses the components of reading? Or is it missing some pieces? So then you actually list the strategies that the student's parent can use and any additional services that the teacher deems available and appropriate. Now, we got a lot of pushback from teachers because at the beginning of the year, you're going to have most of your students in probably urgent intervention, and they're like, are we supposed to do this for all of us? Yes, until the progress monitoring shows otherwise, right? So these are the good cause exemptions. And I'm a parent. My daughter is in 6th grade. She is conquering middle school, but she was in the first cohort to actually take this 3rd grade reading assessment. And so luckily, I was able to sit in the room and act as, a representative of the department, but also as a mom, talking about how we wanted to communicate this and what this actually meant for parents. So when we did our first road show that year and had all of these parent meetings, I said to parents, these are some things you need to ask for. If you don't see your child's STAR report, you need to ask your child's teacher. A lot of times parents just don't know. And no one really tells them at the school, well, yeah, these are some things that you should have. Ask all of your child's teachers for this information. So good cause exemptions. I told parents this is something you need to know. You need to, if your child is limited English proficient students with less than 2 years of instruction, then he or she may qualify for a good cause exemption, which means that the student takes the test, fails the test, and the good cause exemption is applied because of A. B is for our students that cannot participate in our statewide accountability assessment, our STD students. C, students who have an IEP or 504 and has received intensive remediation for 2 years, documented. So where do you think we got in trouble here? Anybody? I'd like for y'all to talk to me. It's after lunch. Come on now. Let's do it. All right, so where do you think we got in trouble here? You said what? They didn't include them? You have to include them, but also the second part, it says or was previously retained. First it said and we had a technical amendment. There was this thing in Mississippi, it was just kind of an unknown, unspoken, where students who were in SPED did not get retained. Teachers just didn't. And it's not until this law came out that they were like, oh, we could retain them. All right, so the 2 years of documented intensive intervention, they weren't doing that, because what do you find with some of the IEPs? The name changes, but the accommodations stay the same, right? Is that anywhere? Not just in the South, right? Name changes, accommodations the same. It's like, oh, wow, gosh, you've had the same accommodations for 3 years, right? So now we got to the point where we were telling teachers, you really need to list what you need to do, and on top of that, you need to do it. And then after progress monitoring, because that's the part that you get the miscommunication. Oh, we're supposed to do it? All right, so then after the progress monitoring, you have to see if it works. And if it doesn't, guess what? You need to try something else. All right? And so that was our good cause exemption C. Good cause exemption D, of course, is a retest. Our students get two additional opportunities to pass the assessment with a retest. And then E was also something that raised a few eyebrows, because this is actually happening. Students who have received intensive intervention for 2 or more years and who were previously retained for 2 years. They do not have an IEP 504. So you have students who are 10 years old in 3rd grade. And then you say, well, how did that even happen? Like, how did you not notice this kid? So this good cause exemption was created for that kid. But again, it began then a lot of conversations about why aren't we identifying these kids, and how is a child retained 2 years, doesn't have an IEP or 504, and you've been documenting intervention, so you know there's a reading deficiency. How does this happen? All right, so those are our 5 good cause exemptions. Law also states that if a student is promoted with the good cause exemption, then they have to have an individual reading plan in 4th grade. And then they also should make sure that the student is with a highly qualified teacher. all right, so how did the community react to this? I was talking to someone earlier, and she was like, what did I know you had some pushback. Yeah, we did. And we had like headlines all over the state, and I'm like, I'm a black girl leading literacy in Mississippi? Jesus, right? So when I talked to Governor Bryan, I was like, I get your phone calls about your, so this is what happened. Policy was enacted in 2013. 2013, 2014 was really our year of working with the community. 2014, 2015 was the year it went live. Now, I've talked to people in other states that have these policies, and I don't think anyone has gone live as quickly as we did. And so, with the policy, headlines, April of 2013, Governor Bryant says signs education reform bills into law. I was hired in July, by the way, and started August 1, all right? So then, all right, so miscommunication. During that year, there were several legislators who were against this third grade reading policy. Again, they were like, we don't have enough time. No one told us, we didn't see this coming. And so there was miscommunication about whether they were going to delay it for a year. So then we started getting these headlines saying that the third grade reading gate was no more. Like, you don't even have to worry about it. So we started getting phone calls from parents and, are we still doing this? I'm like, yeah, next year, so miscommunication. With the assessment, guess what? We were going through the transition of Park, new standards. I think we had Park for maybe 1 year. Then we had Common Core. And we called it College and Career Readiness, changed a couple of words. But we still did not have, we didn't want to use our state assessment because we didn't even have any data from previous years to show what the impact would be. So with Renaissance Learning, they developed our third grade reading assessment for the first 2 years until we got on track with our state accountability assessment. So we didn't know what it was going to look like either. Don't tell anybody. You recording this? And so, but you have to do the united front publicly, right? So we were working with Renaissance during the time saying, okay, these are the standards that need to be assessed. This is what we need to do. So then people were calling like, okay, what's the test? We've never seen it. And in our office, we're like, we haven't either. So, but, we were like, oh, it's going to test the standards and, all of that. But we knew that. We just had to work to get it developed. So the standards. Uncertainty about third grade standards frustrates school officials. When I say our reporters went from the top of Mississippi to the bottom, getting principals to talk about how they felt about it and were frustrated, the department isn't saying anything. This also affected teacher preparation. So as you all, for those of you that have the law and for those of you, your states are considering it, I know Michigan has recently added it, it affects all of these stakeholders, as you can see, right? So for teacher preparation, now our teachers need to step up for reading instruction. Because I don't know about you, but at all the school I have, no one really taught me how to teach struggling readers, right? They may say, okay, well, this is what you do. This is how you teach reading. But what happens when you get that kid that just really doesn't get it? What do you do then? No one's really teaching that part. So now we had to think about the capacity of our teachers in order to teach reading. And the anxiety. Oh my, we're going to have 75% of our kids that fail this test, and then all of them will repeat third grade, and right? So then they were like, now we're going to have all of our upper elementary teachers teach third grade. We're going to have all these classes. So there was a fear of failure in Mississippi. But guess what? We pushed forward, right? We prayed, and we pushed forward with it. So that was the community response. So 2016, Southeast Comprehensive Center came down and they looked at our efforts. And this quote, within 2 years, the MDE responded to the specs of the Act with focused, purposeful actions and mechanisms that included research-based interventions to advance the teaching and learning of literacy. So we went to work, and I'll tell you how we did that. Since 2013, we've received $69.5 million from our state legislature. And you might say, oh, that's a lot. No. First year, $9.5 million, because they were like, we're going to see if this is going to work. All right? The next few years, every year since, we've gotten $15 million. Where everything else has been cut around us, we've continued to get funding. And it speaks specifically to the efforts of our literacy coaches that we have and our K-3 teachers, and again, our stakeholders who are out there saying that, you know, we were ready for this, we just didn't have the confidence for it. All right, we also procured our K-3 assessment system. We didn't have a system at the state level for our screener, diagnostic assessment, and of course our alternative assessment, which is our retest. We provided Renaissance Learning access to all state-funded pre-K third grade students. So from the state, we purchased all the licenses for all of our elementary schools, and there are 400 and about 26 elementary schools. So all students had access to this. And our Department of Ed created additional offices to support the implementation. We hired an early childhood director. My position actually was K-3 when I started. It is extended to K-12, and a student intervention services director for multi-tiered system of supports. You know, we keep saying intensive intervention, but what does that really look like? If you're not giving us training on it, you know, you don't have a department, so, you know, a division, so how does that look? We also procured statewide literacy training. And I'll talk to you about that in our next step. LETRS, Louisa Moats. Y'all heard of her? I got an opportunity to meet her. She is cool. All right, so LETRS for our early childhood teachers, K-3 teachers, K-8 SPED teachers, elementary principals, and University of Reading faculty. University of Reading faculty. I'll talk a little bit about that because, again, there's enough accountability for everyone, right? So we also, with our literacy coaches, we provided regional literacy trainings and supplied literacy resources. So when they go to LETRS training, they receive this kit. And it's kind of like all you need to teach reading with manipulatives and felt squares and lap boards and markers and all of these other things that goes along with going to the training. We gave out literacy grants, and you all are probably still like, with $9 million? Yeah, you know, you have to learn how to do a lot with a little, right? And then we launched our statewide literacy campaign. So these are some of the resources and publications that we have for teachers. If you go to our literacy website, then you can find these. We have this amazing Literacy Focus of the Month manual for elementary and secondary teachers, and they now include videos, which means that the month of August is screening and diagnostic assessments. So you'll get the research, a little short webinar about that, and then after that you'll see a video of coaches doing a mock data meeting, putting cards on data walls and what information should be used. September is phonological awareness for elementary, morphology for secondary, and again, our coaches went to schools all across the state and modeled lessons with students. And so you can actually see these strategies in action. And then we have all of these other documents, but one thing that we're very proud of is most recently we hired a director for English learner supports. And we now have videos that teachers can use to work with their English learners. Okay, so that's for teachers. Publications for administrators include all of these wonderful things. Our MTSS flow chart, our early warning system, and then publications for parents. Our parent read at home plan for student success is amazing, but also we have our family guides for student success in English and Spanish, and it's from pre-K through 8th grade in both reading and math, practical strategies for parents as it relates to the standards, and it's in very practical terms. And one thing that I wanted to mention, I made a couple of notes, but Mississippi last year won the Frank Newman Award for State Innovation from the Education Commission of the states because of our efforts with early literacy policy change, also our new A through F accountability system. And so we were just very proud to be recognized for our efforts in Mississippi in education, especially as it relates to early literacy. All right, so what was our step 2? We realized once our coaches got into the buildings, we needed to build some teacher capacity for teaching reading, right? So, MDE coaching model. This is our organization chart where we have assistant state coordinators, regional coordinators, and literacy coaches. And this is how it looks. 13, 14, when I started, we had 29 coaches in 26 districts, and we were serving 50 schools. Literacy coaches were placed in the lowest performing schools in the state. So we rank ordered the schools, did an average of 2 years of third grade data, and began placing coaches as the schools were ranked. We could only serve the number of schools with the number of coaches that we had. Most coaches served 2 schools, 2 to 3 days a week for the entire year. And you can see as the years have gone by, we've increased our support, and now we're in 179 schools. And I'll get to show you a little data a little later. All right, so what is the role of our coach? For those of you who have been coaches, some of our schools, even our A's and B schools, said, you know, we're hearing about this coaching thing, and it's working. And I said, well, yeah, you know, even our multi-million-dollar athletes have coaches, right? And so I love Nick Saban, by the way, at University. His hair, the highlights, it just gets me every time. So, but anyway, so I like football. But you talk about coaching, you talk about how they kind of walk up and down the sidelines and coach the players. And so that's what our teachers are doing. I mean, our coaches are doing. And the most important part when we were interviewing for coaches is that you can't just know how to teach reading. You have to be able to work well with other adults. Because if we don't have a good relationship, you can't teach me anything, right? So that was extremely important for our coaches. And guess what else we found out? Our elementary principals needed coaching, right? How many of you, or you may be that person, or you may be sitting with that person, and if you are, you can just blink your eyes. Don't lose your job over this presentation. But, you know, high school teacher, then all of a sudden, you know, you get your admin license, and then they put you at an elementary school to be the principal. Sometimes we found with those principals, they may look at, okay, well, we want you standing all day. You can't sit, or there's too much noise in the classroom. And none of the feedback that teachers receive relate to what? Instruction. So when we had coaches going in with the teachers and trying to convince principals that, oh, we need small group instruction, oh, we need the standards posted with, you know, the products, and we need this, and when we got feedback, you know, kind of resistance, we realized that it was because the principal didn't necessarily know or understand the importance of it. So our coaches also work with the principals to make sure that they understand what best practices are through our learning walkthroughs and you know, observing classrooms together. And so on this continuum, and I can just kind of go through the roles of the coach, they serve as collaborative resource managers. They work with the teachers, they encourage the teachers, you know, the whole you can do it type thing. But they also make sure that their relationships are kind of sacred. Some principals would try to use the coach to get rid of a teacher. You know that, right? What are you seeing? What are you seeing in her classroom? Because she's not, and the coach will say, well, you can come in with me and we can talk about next steps, but I'm not going to help you evaluate this teacher, right? I'm going to coach this teacher. So, of course, literacy content presentations, they provide that on-site coaching, professional development, and then they're able to follow up with the feedback and going in the classroom and modeling and co-teaching. Focused classroom visits. You know, you can't be a coach and say, I'm just going to visit all the third grade teachers today, just aimlessly. I'm just going to see what they're doing. All right, so you have to figure out what the teachers need, and you have to be focused in that. They help with co-planning, lesson planning, study groups, with research. And of course, they demonstrate lessons, and they also co-teach with teachers. One thing that we found with demonstrating lessons, the coach will say, you know, we've been looking and we've been working on this. I'm going to model this strategy for you. And the coach would come to the room, and guess what the teacher would say? Well, I need to run to the restroom, and I'll be right back. So we've taught the coaches to say, so we'll wait. Because at the end of the day, I'm modeling this for you. I'm not substitute teaching your class, right? I'm modeling this lesson because, you know, eventually I want to see you do it, you know? So we had to make sure that with the forms that we created, or even just the kind of protocols and procedures, you have to account for certain things. And I always tell people, if I can do nothing else, I can create a form for that. So we have a demonstration lesson form. All of our forms are located on our literacy webpage. But we do have a demonstration lesson form so that teachers are actively engaged in what the coach is presenting, how the coach is presenting, how the students are responding, what the engagement level is, whether the coach, is on this side of the room the most because that's her amen corner, or whether the coach really involves other students. So we have a demonstration lesson form. And of course the co-teaching, which involves the prior planning. Our continuum of coaching, I just do want to take a break and say something about Florida. The REL Southeast, amazing regional education laboratory. This is how I met Adria. She, in Florida, our third grade law is fashioned almost identical except for the portfolios after Florida's law. And the REL Southeast has provided us with so much technical assistance. I mean, coming and doing joint professional development to our teachers. They're just a really, really great resource. And so again, when I started that July, I was handed a flash drive that had Kevin Smith's name over it and was like, look at some of the stuff Kevin has presented, and go forth and be great. And so that's what I did. And this was one of those resources, the continuum of coaching. And this is something that we really rely on as our model, where it's interactive coaching, the increased scaffolding at the beginning and the decreased scaffolding. And our coaches, they complete logs. And I say, well, if it's March, you shouldn't be doing all of this modeling. You should have moved toward co-teaching, and now it should be more about observations and feedback, because if you're still modeling in March, you're teaching that teacher's class. And sometimes teachers will come to you and ask, and you're like, oh, they need me, and they're really like, girl, I want you to teach this, like I got my calendar, you're going to teach this. So, they have to be very careful about what is really modeling and co-teaching, as opposed to someone just saying, oh, I have all of these things I need help with, and I'm going to schedule you to do these things. So this is the model that we use. All right, so also in our literacy support schools, one thing that we can do that some states that have coaches, they haven't been able to do. Our coaches are employees of their district, but they receive all of their guidance from my office. They're called educators in residence. So with state employees, you have to have a PIN, and our state was not going to grant us 75 permanent PINs, right? So the way that we're able to employ these people is we hire them, and then we give their school districts grants for specified services. So they're supposed to be with us for a period of time, like a deployment, and then they're supposed to return to their district. People didn't think that we would last past 3 years, but we're in year 5 now, and we keep getting funded. So one thing that we're able to do with our coaches is to really kind of make sure that they're not substitute teaching. And I say, if someone hands you a walkie-talkie, don't take it, right? Because that's bus duty, that's this, that's lunch duty, that's all of that that will take you away from coaching. Don't take the walkie-talkie, it's the death of you. So they can't do it, but we can say that. But if it's a coach hired by the school or district, guess what they can say? We have a teacher out today, and I know you're the coach, but I need you in this classroom. So we're fortunate in that way that we're able to kind of oversee the coach's duties. Also in our schools, we're able to say what we consider best practices. These 8 things must be present in our literacy support schools. They must have a school literacy plan. We developed a template for that. Their instruction has to be aligned to the Mississippi College and Career Readiness standards. They must have word walls. They must participate in POCs, standing POCs, not just on your calendar, but actually participating in these types of POCs. And one must be data every month. They must have a data POC, content POC, planning POC, but must be data POC, one data POC every month. They have to have data walls or data room. Uninterrupted 90-minute reading block. We went to a school and conference with a principal, looked at the schedule. They were spending as much time for restroom breaks as they were for reading instruction. 60 minutes a day, they were washing hands or going to the restroom, And then they had 60 minutes for reading instruction. And we said something about that has to change, right? Anchor charts and, of course, writing connected to text. So what was our step 3? LETRS. LETRS has been great for our teachers in Mississippi. So when we found out about the capacity, we said, what? We need to do something about it. We need to create a common language for best practices in reading instruction, because our teachers go through all of these different preparation programs and come out, like we said, knowing something a little different, right? So we wanted to be responsible for developing that baseline of what reading instruction looked like. And this was our statewide efforts. A lot of times, I get a lot of calls from different states. And what they want to know about most is, how did you do that? Especially with just $15 million and you did all this other stuff, right? How did you do this? So with LETRS, and our rep is here, I don't know if I can say that, Toni Backstrom is here. You all have probably met her outside. She's amazing to work with Voyager, Sophus, and Cambium. But the first thing that we did was, of course, we had to put out the RFP. We had several vendors to submit, and they had to come down and present their ideas. And so one thing that we wanted to do was to make sure that our teachers weren't out of the classroom a whole lot. And so they worked with us on the different options of how we would do this. One of the best things we could have done was make sure that we had Cambium, the trainers. So we didn't do a TOT model. What happens with TOT, everybody? You train people in your district, and guess what? They leave, and then there's no one else in your district to do the training. So we decided to go directly to the teachers. And we landed on these 8 LETRS modules. Our teachers were when we first started, we did just this big push. We wanted to train 10,000 teachers in 3 years. Our K-3 teachers, our K-8 SPED teachers, our administrators, and I mentioned IHL faculty. All right, so we wanted to do that, and we did it. We're now at about 12,000 teachers and growing, because guess what also happens? Teachers that were teaching 4th grade then come down to 2nd, 3rd grade. Okay, so every year we've been offering these trainings. And the teachers who go through this, it's like a year-long kind of, you would call it a course, because they get so much information. So we were able to land on phase 1, 20 hours of online professional development. The teachers receive the modules. And then they have 2 to 3 days face-to-face for our struggling, our students, our schools that are have the highest percentage of students below proficiency. They were receiving 3 days, and our other schools 2 days. That's semester 1. Next semester they come back and they do the second part of LETRS, also another 20 hours online, and then also another 2 to 3 days. So in total they were out of school 4 to 6 days, but over the course of the year, which was a lot better than saying we need them out of 6 days at one time, right? So they have to take an assessment at the end of each phase, and then they have to come to the face-to-face ready to apply what they've learned and also learn a new module. So this worked really well. We had to tell our districts and schools, we can't reimburse you for subs, because we got to have some buy-in, right? Sometimes when you pay for everything, people don't appreciate you. Y'all had that? Like even in your personal life, right? People don't appreciate it when you pay for everything. All right, so we said, well, we'll pay for this, but we need your commitment in ensuring that your teachers are able to get out. So the schools could send like their K-1 teachers to one, their 2nd and 3rd grade teachers to another. And we have 6 regional education service providers in our state. So the teachers could choose which location they wanted to go to, which was closest to where they were. And so at the State Department, we also offered trainings. So after we implemented our coaches, we had more districts that said that they wanted to invest in their own coaches. So we began to offer ABCs of coaching to either curriculum coordinators or school-based coaches or district-based coaches. We also offered regional literacy trainings for pre-K teachers, administrators, trainings on MTSS, and our Rethink Literacy training, which I'm very proud of, for our upper elementary and secondary teachers. Because we get these kids ready, and then we go to 4th grade and 5th grade, where some of our schools are departmentalized already, and you have a math teacher, you have a science teacher, and then you're still trying to tell them it's so important that you have vocabulary instruction. It's so important that you, and they're like, look, I teach math, right? So you have to convince them as well, and I think that it's really opened their eyes to ways in which they can better prepare students for instruction in science, because you're focusing on morphology, you're focusing on all of those prefixes and suffixes and all of those things. And so now we have an annual early childhood conference and an annual literacy coaching symposium. So we also now have an Office of Professional Development, and we have a menu of services. So on that menu, we offer technical assistance in ELA, math, science, and special education. So you say, well, you're in 179 schools, and I heard you say you had about 420 something. What's for them? Our regional trainings that we host are for them, but we also have what we call our PDCs, our professional development coordinators, where districts are able to submit an application for, well, not necessarily an application, but a form. They choose from the list of the sessions that we have, and a PDC will come to their school or to their district and provide the PD. And this is just a copy of the report that our PDC coordinator releases each month to tell us about how many educators have been impacted by the services that we've been providing. So it's good data. And I'm going to tell you, every legislative session, my job is to think about the data that we have that will support us getting funded for the next year, because we're solely at the mercy of our legislature. So it's great to talk about these things, but you have to document that you've actually seen some successes with it. All right, educator outcomes. So this is the study that we waited almost 2 years for the release of. And educator outcomes associated with implementation of Mississippi's K-3 Early Literacy Professional Development Initiative. Rail Southeast was instrumental in this. They developed the survey that our teachers took, the pre and post survey, and they also developed the classroom instrument that our literacy coaches use to go into classrooms and to look at reading instruction and identify the different components. So this study took place from winter 2014 to fall 2015, and these were our key findings. And in target schools, remember, those are our lowest performing schools in the state. So the average educator knowledge increased from 48% to 59% on the teacher knowledge of early literacy skills survey. And this survey was sent out to all teachers, all K-3 teachers in the state. So from pre and post, their educator knowledge, and when I say pre and post, that depends on where they were in LETRS training. So this study was centered around LETRS training and how it transferred into the classroom. Because a lot of times, we go to PD, we get that nice binder, and we go back to our rooms and classrooms, and guess what? We just put it on the shelf, right? So in order for us to continue to get funding, we had to show that this huge commitment that we've made, not just with money, but with the teacher's time, right? Getting out of classrooms, the district's paying for subs, we had to show that it was working. And so we were just over the moon to know that, yes, it was. You know, thank God it really was working, right? So our average educator knowledge increased from before LETRS to after they attended LETRS training. And for those that actually had coaches with them in the schools, their quality of instruction, the average rating of quality of instruction increased from 31% to 58%. Student engagement increased, and teaching competencies increased. That's the way you want it to go, right? So let me tell you what they did. They had our coaches, and Kevin always says, Kevin Smith from Florida, he always comes and he talks about the quality of our coaches in Mississippi. I mean, we have some really, really sharp people. And he always talks about that. So what they had to do was they went into classrooms, they observed, but then they also had to record the teacher's instruction. Then we had this big meeting where rail staff came to Mississippi, and essentially the teachers exchanged videos. And then I use my tool to indicate what I saw from the teacher's classroom that you had observed. And they had to do what's called inter-rater reliability. Is that right? I do read, not math, so I'm just so, see, I didn't even look at my notes, but I remember that. Inter-rater reliability. And we had such a high rate of inter-rater reliability, which showed that our coaches, first of all, knew what they were looking for, right? Or what they were identifying. And then they knew that when their TAs entered the data, that these results would be as accurate as they needed to be because our inter-rater reliability was so strong. All right, so we were so pleased and proud of those key findings. And so now we talk about the students. This is why we get up every day, right? So our kindergarten readiness assessment. Remember earlier I talked to you about those early learning collaboratives where they're partnerships? We have for our pre-K public school students, they take the kindergarten readiness assessment to start early literacy as well. They take it at the exit of pre-K, and their end of year target score should be 498. So what you see now is a comparison of our spring scale score for our early learning collaboratives, that's in the hot pink, and for our other funded pre-K. As you can see, from 2015 to 2017, our students, our pre-K students who are in that collaborative, which means that they partner with the actual K-5 school administrator, early childhood directors, they all partner together. As you can see, they have outpaced outscored our students in the other funded pre-K just because of that collaboration. And we say to our teachers all the time, just because you don't have the money, this actually pays for, PD or food, when you come to the sessions. But you can form a partnership for free. You can call the teacher at the local child care agency and say, we're going to have PD for our kindergarten teachers. Do you want to come see what we're doing? That's free. So we want to try to encourage that spirit of collaboration with our local early childhood providers and teachers and also our local school districts. So in kindergarten, I talked about the 2/3 not being ready and then the 2/3 being ready. But look at the average scale score. In the fall, where the students should be meeting 530 to enter, consistently it's only been about 501. In the spring, when they exit, 710 for this last year for their end of year target score, which should be 681 to be on track to be successful in 3rd grade. Now, 3rd grade Literacy-Based Promotion Act assessment results. So I told you about the 15-16 where Renaissance Learning provided our 3rd grade assessment because we were in transition from our state assessments. So this year we all knew spring 2017, okay, now we're going to use the state assessment. We thought that we were going to have more students that didn't pass the assessment because this was a state assessment, more rigorous, but our students showed out, right? Because our teachers have been teaching to this level since we began. So when we started, the first assessment results are just statewide, and at the bottom you'll see those from our literacy support schools. And remember, these are our schools who are the lowest performing schools in the state. I want to bring your attention to this right here. In this spring, we've kind of consistently remained about 10, 12 points below the average as far as the difference with our lowest performing schools and in the state as a whole. This year, we actually closed that gap by 50% in our lowest performing schools. Yes, yay! And again, this is on our statewide accountability assessment aligned to our college and career readiness standards. So we are very, very pleased to see this data. All right, and so on our MAAP assessment, one thing that we've been looking at is this 1.3% change for grade 4. And this, again, is our state assessment. But one thing that you will see in our other grades, English, language arts, and math, almost all grades, except for 4 and English 2 is our 10th grade assessment, we've had positive changes or positive growth in our scores. Now, this is something that we were very proud of. How many of you knew that in 2014, Mississippi was the only state in the nation that had significant gains in both reading and math fourth grade? Did you know that? We had this huge press release about it and all of that, but we were the only state with significant gains. Our average scale score went from 209 to 214 on NAEP. And so it's one thing to talk about your state data, but when you can look at the NAEP data, you get pretty proud, right? So we're extremely proud of our teachers, and we really kind of, you know, we look at it two ways. We look at it, you know, our full implementation of our college and career readiness standards, and also our big push and focus on literacy and our literacy efforts and increasing the capacity of our teachers. So we work very closely also with Excel in Ed out of Florida, Excellence in Education, and Carrie Miller, who's policy director, she developed this slide. I'm in a cohort networking group with probably about 14 states that have third grade reading laws. And check out Mississippi. Our law was passed in 2013, and we have had 5 scale score points improvement as opposed to some states who passed their laws earlier. You know, it's something about just getting pushed into the pool, right? You just have to try to sink or swim, right? So I think that's what we've done, and we're just extremely proud of that. All right, so what were some of our factors to successful literacy outcomes? We actually called schools. We had someone to call some schools that were doing really well and said, what really helped you succeed? And they talked about strong teacher content knowledge and instructional practices. And someone mentioned earlier during the keynote, and it may have been Dr. Seidenberg, about, you know, just the instructional practices and the teaching part. You know, that's really what positively impacts student outcomes. But of course, supportive administrators. Low teacher principal turnover, because we do have an issue with that, especially in our Delta, in our poorest areas of the state. We have high teacher turnover, principal turnover. There's really nowhere to live, you know, and to start a family. So sometimes teachers want to get their student loans forgiven. So they go to critical teacher shortage areas. But then after about 2 years, guess what? You know, they're gone. 2 to 3 years, they're gone. Receptiveness to the support, data-driven, whole and small group reading instruction, effective multi-tiered system of support process, of course, and you know, which includes behavior of students. And I was talking with someone earlier, and she was saying, you know, well, yeah, the classroom management piece. You know, you can't teach a child unless the classroom management, or even the way that these children affect how the entire class goes. We talked about, you know, the impact of the peers in the classroom. So the teacher has to get classroom management manageable and under control, and also professional learning communities. All right, so what's next for us? How am I doing on time? Am I good? 146. All right, so a look ahead. Expanding the literacy focus beyond third grade. We haven't gotten any money to do that. However, we've been able to use our pot for college and career readiness to offer our Rethink Literacy professional development. Because again, you know, it's not just teaching the standards. You know, you have to have the strategies in order to equip students in order to learn the content. And to increase efforts to retain qualified teachers to address significant turnover among K-3. So the Barksdale Reading Institute is a great friend of the state of Mississippi and also of the Mississippi Department of Education. And they went around to all of our colleges and universities to kind of survey and observe in person their reading instruction in Early Literacy 1 and Early Literacy 2 courses. And they found that it varied greatly. There may have been some universities that committed to 3-hour courses, others like 50 minutes, others were, right? So they said, okay, we're doing Early Literacy 1, Early Literacy 2, but we're just gonna do it how we wanna do it. And so out of that study, Governor Bryant created the Task Force on Teacher Preparation for Early Literacy. And so we're looking at ways for, you know, one of the things we talked about was teachers who are alternate route. And the way that they're not immersed in those foundational skills in teaching reading. But they still have to get CEUs, right, in order to be recertified. So we looked at trying to require a certain percentage of, or number of those CEUs to be that they have to attend literacy professional development that deals with literacy instruction. And last thing, I may have mentioned our Higher Ed Literacy Council. And someone talked earlier about, and I think it was Dr. Seidenberg again. I was paying attention. That's what you're supposed to do in the keynote. He talked about the test that we now have some of our pre-service teachers taking. And so guess what? Mississippi has that. In 2016, July 1, 2016, it went live. So our elementary education majors, in order to be licensed in elementary education, they have to take, in addition to Praxis 1 and Praxis 2, the Foundations of Reading exam. We started preparing for that a year out. We invited deans of College of Education, chairs, and we chose the assessment together. So it wasn't just a Mississippi Department of Ed thing. We chose it together. That's how you get buy-in, right? So remember when I also said that we have been offering LETRS training? So initially, once the professors saw how much the time commitment was, they were like, no, I don't need to do that. But when we got our first score report of how our pre-service teachers actually did on Foundations of Reading, then you have these notable universities who have a pass rate that may not be so high. We started getting calls from these professors saying, about that LETRS training you were offering for free. So now they're going to go through it in a cohort. We have about 40 professors who are scheduled to begin LETRS training this fall, actually. Because sometimes they haven't been in classrooms, and I don't know how long, and they still have the books that they love, you know, that you have to buy for my class, but none of it deals with Foundations of Reading. It does deal with the practical application of reading, not just what is phonological awareness. But if you had student A, and these were the results that you received on the diagnostic report, what would you do next type of questions. So now the buy-in from IHL is there because we have enough accountability for everyone. And so I think that's it for me. Do I have any questions?